Welcome to the Power of Our Story. Today we have Chris Gregorio bringing our topic to us, and the topic for today's episode is selfless service and the cost to the family.
Thank you, Michael. I love your absolutely beautiful radio voice there. It's inspiring. Well, thanks everybody for being here. I just wanted to bring up this topic because I think that it's super important. And like most things in my life, it is derived from a lot of failure. So I've been in the service for a combined total of about 24 years. I did almost 9 years active duty in the Army, and I've been in the reserve since. I'm also a police officer in the Pacific Northwest for almost 20 years. I'm on my counted third marriage. It's so typical in these realms. The first one I like to say is I was a young guy leaving to go from one place to go to another. And, the harsh story, I could go with you if we just get married. And I thought that was a great idea. We get married, I go to school, she has to stay there, and I come back and we're no longer together. Fast forward a bunch of years, I meet another lady when I come back from Afghanistan. We get married in short order, have kids, have all the things, and that didn't work out either. And at that time, I wasn't active duty service any longer. I was a police officer. And so that ended. And I told myself, you know what, I'm never getting married again. I'm done. And anybody that I met, that was one of those agreements. Hey, is there any marriage in your future? Is that something you want? If so, then, it's probably a deal breaker. Do you want any kids? No more? Okay, because that would probably be a deal breaker. And then I met the love of my life. Corny as that sounds, I know most people say that, but with the first two marriages, something just didn't feel right before you did it. There's little red flags here or there. I didn't have any red flags with this woman. Everything just seemed right. And we'll talk about it a little bit later, but that was solidified through a bunch of different critical incidents that I was involved in that were very difficult for the family and led me to realize that as successful as I've been in a lot of things in my life, it was an abject failure in a lot of ways as a family man. And so, selfless service. Selfless service to me is a weird thing. I guess most people would characterize me as being a true believer. I feel absolutely blessed and lucky to have been born in this country. And I feel for me, it's by chance, right? God's design, chance or whatever. I could have been born in Afghanistan. I could have been born in Iraq. I could have been born in Mexico. I could have been born anywhere else wouldn't afford me the life that I have today, and the blessings that I've had, even with all the horrific struggles and things that I've gone through in life, like most people. So I feel it's my job to pay it back. I have to earn my place in this country every single day, and I know that that's true for a lot of people. In whatever it is that they do. And for me, that was at the cost of anything. This is what I felt God put me here to do. I was born to be a soldier. I was born to be a police officer. And by any stretch of whatever anybody's imagination was, I'm going to do that at any cost. And I'm going to try to be the best at it, although I've never succeeded at that, at any cost. And I've never given credence or asked permission to my family. I've never even consulted them until recently about my career decisions. What I was going to do is what I was going to do, because I was going to put myself in a position to do more good. I was going to go put myself in a position to take care of more people. And there's an absolute cost to that. It can make you really good at what you do, or at least more of an asset than a liability. But I didn't realize it, and I'm 45 years old now. I didn't realize that I'd become a liability to my family in a lot of ways. Hence, on my third marriage, I thought that these careers in service, whether it be military, first responders, doctors, nurses, people that give all this time and all their focus and their lives are given to other people. And there's a huge cost to the family. And I won't speak for anybody else, but I'll speak for me. All of my successes, whether it be in the military or as a police officer, have made me an abject failure as a family man. I've done a lot of good, but I've never considered the cost to those that I love the most. I'd die for a stranger. I surely die for my family. But one thing I wasn't willing to do, and I think from my experience and people that I know, so many of us aren't willing to do, is give our family the time. And we rationalize it and we justify it by saying, I'm going to work this overtime so we can do more things, so we can have a nicer house, so we can go on more vacations. And those all sound great in our head until we have a moment, either we find some self-awareness or somebody in your family says, I would have given all that stuff up to have another day with you. I don't care about going on a vacation somewhere. Now, for me, maybe a lot of that stuff, this drive for success, this drive for service comes from my growing up. I forget who said it. A lot of people have said it. I want to, Sean Ryan is one of these guys that says this, that 70% of first responders and service members, especially tip of the spear guys, 70% of them have had some extreme traumas and abuses in their lives as kids growing up, whether it's physical abuse, emotional abuse, a tremendous amount of sexual abuse. Somehow, some way, those things have lined up to put people in a line of service. And be damned to all the consequences of those things. Now, what made me recognize this? I've been through a lot of critical incidents in my career. And in the name of anonymity, I won't name any of them, but from horrific things where officers have been killed or bad guys have lost their lives. You know, I've never gone to work a single day in my life where I say, man, I hope I make it home today. I hope today is not the day that my ticket's punched. I go to work excited because it's what I want to do. I'm excited. I still say this today. I don't think I've ever really worked a day in my life because I love what I do. But I know that every day that I walk out that door, or any first responder or service man or woman walks out the door on a training deployment or a deployment, saying their family's like, I hope I don't get that letter. I hope this isn't the day that some command staff person and a chaplain comes to my door. I hope that my husband or wife's boss doesn't call me and say, hey, I need to come pick you up. We need to go to the hospital, or worse. People very often thank us for our service. And it's something that we choose to do. I've never asked my kids if they wanted to do that. I've never asked my kids or my wife if they wanted to sacrifice. Because in my head, I said, well, selfless, I call it selfish selflessness. Well, I'm serving, and if you're with me, you're part of my tribe, you're part of my family. Well, you're along for the ride. Damn the cost. I didn't realize how arrogantly selfish that was. And there's good in it, but it's very arrogantly selfish. You know, I don't remember who told me, but somebody said the greatest gift that you can give the world is to raise a good family, to make good people, because there's not enough good people in this world. And we put all the focus, you know, it's kind of that 80-20 rule. You put 80% of your energy into the 20% crap. And then, you know, first responder world, I'd say it's probably 3% crap, but that commands sometimes 90-95% of your time. And you don't give the time that is needed for your family. My son recently graduated high school and is on his time in college. And we had sat around the fire pit smoking a cigar, and I had to admit to him and thank him for all that he sacrificed. And that's all I said. I said, son, I just want you to know that I'm really proud of you and how successful you are. And I want you to know that I see you and that I understand now what you've been through, the trauma that you've suffered by being my son, the things that you've had to go through and endure, the fears, the abandonment, all those things. I said, I want you to know that I understand that, and I'm sorry. I apologize to you and I appreciate you. And in those, and in that realm, I look up to him. And I didn't even get through half of those words, and he started breaking down. And he's like, Dan, I know that you're supposed to be, I look at you as kind of this invincible guy. He goes, I know that you're not, but I do. And I look back, and I could have lost you all these different times. Yeah. And I never really debriefed it with him ever, or my wife, or my girls. How are you doing? Are you okay? How are you feeling about this? And I think that that's something that we should do. I know, Catherine, if I may bring you into this, that you're from a law enforcement family. How does that perspective, coming from an idiot like me who lives that life without regard, and I'm not saying your father was this way or you're anybody in your family, but I didn't give regard to my family. How does that resonate with you as a family member of a first responder?
It definitely resonates, and I agree with what you're saying, and it's part of what motivates me to do what I'm doing, because I think what you're saying is so important, and it's so common for people, for police officers, first responders, to come to those conclusions in retrospect. I wish I had done all of these things. I wish I had done X, Y, and Z. I wish I connected with my family, my kids and stuff. And it's always, so often it's in retrospect. And I really want more officers to understand in the moment that they need to build those relationships, and even simplify what it entails. Like you said, working more overtime so that they can go on fun vacations, lavish vacations, have a bigger house. And that's not what the kids need, and it's not what they want. They want you to skip that extra overtime shift and maybe go on a shorter vacation or something, or no vacation, as long as their parent is there and reading them their bedtime story or waking them up in the morning. And that's really all they want and all they care about. And that's the experience that I had. My dad always passed up overtime for time with us. And it made a huge impact on my life and who I am today. And what I think about a lot is, at the end of the day, and I know that it's a calling, and it's a noble profession, and it's incredible, and you see and do a lot of amazing things. But at the end of the day, it does need to be a job, because it's eventually going to end. Hopefully it ends in retirement. But it could end sooner than that. It could end way more traumatically than that. And when it does end, you don't want to not even know who you are. You don't want your kids to not know who you are. You don't want to not know who your kids are, because they're going to be grown-ups now. And you don't even know who they are, what they like, what they do for fun. And you missed out on so much. So I think really what you're sharing is so impactful, because it's so common, and it's the nature of the job to get caught up in all of this. And it's, like I said, you're definitely not alone. It's more common than not, I would say. And I think more people in your position and in your shoes and with your experiences sharing about this and speaking up about it is going to start to turn the tides a little bit, I hope. So anyway.
Thank you. And that is my hope, is to shed some light on this, put some focus on it, because I think that it is important that you are all in these careers, because if you're not all in, bad things happen, right? You have to be laser focused and all those things. However, I would beg of anybody, please don't be Leroy Jenkins all in. Don't roll your eyes in the back of the fork. Here we go. Be thoughtful. Don't be reactive. I talk about this often in training. Don't just react. Slow down in your training, make deliberate decisions, so that in the future, when you're reacting, it's based on these deliberate decisions that you've made muscle memory in your brain. Michael, you got your hand up, brother.
Yeah, if I take myself off mute, there we go. Yeah, man. So first, like, I appreciate the vulnerability and, sharing that. And um, I don't know how many of y'all know this. Like, my dad just retired after 32 years of service in the military, most of that as a criminal investigator. So a little bit on both sides there. Um, but I think from like that perspective, first I gotta say, dude, if my dad ever said half of what you just said, like I would have cried. Like, to hear that from him, and I think that was an important conversation you had with your son. So good on you for that. But two, like I was 2 years old when my mom and dad got married. So I grew up until 18 in that environment, and that was pre 9/11. So I remember 2 decades of war, right? And dad being gone on training missions or, going overseas. And then later in his career, when he was on, protection detail, um, all I knew was dad's going to be gone for a week or however many days. Sometimes I didn't know how long he was going to be gone because, he couldn't tell us a lot, and not knowing until he got back. And I have a box full of flags because that was what he brought me back from everywhere. So that's when I figured out where he had been. And so, there's that constant, like as a kid, you don't really have a choice in that, especially like in the military, right? You're just kind of born into it. I feel like as a spouse, you kind of know what you're signing up for, kind of. You got more of an idea than as a kid. But even then, I remember, you seeing how it impacted my mom and me and all of that growing up in that environment. Um, and I think my dad, I wouldn't say he was completely disconnected and not always, but he was, somewhere in the middle. I think he did a decent job or the best he could at trying to be a dad. But if I feel like if it came down to us or duty calls, right? And I think that's something that I just accepted over the years. But I know it impacted me, going forward into the military and beyond. I was like, well, I would, if I had gotten married and stuff, I'm like, I don't want to be like that. Like, I want to be connected and be present, which led to me ultimately, like, one thing I do is before I even come into the house, like, I might sit in the car 15 minutes, 30 minutes, however long, and I completely decompress from the day before I come in. So that way I can be present and ready. I'm not carrying all that weight from whatever's happened that day into the house with me. So that way I can be present. So that's just, maybe it's something to try. But again, like, I love what you said. I'm glad that you had that realization to realize, hey, look, like I'm not thinking about the family.
And to say that, it took tragedy for me to understand. And if I could say this from the mountaintops and scream it to everybody, no matter how great you are at your job, we're a cog in a wheel. Because whenever we retire or our day is done, whatever that means, the world keeps spinning. Your departments keep going. Crime still happens. Good things still happen. So as much as we want to be the heroes or whatever and do all this good, it's not all for naught, but it's not an end all be all either. Yes, Sarah, your hands up.
First off, I want to slightly paraphrase Scott Mann that the hardest stories are the best stories. I really appreciate your vulnerability, Chris. Secondly, I would like to say and share that I have met the love of your life. I have met your kids. Your son reminds me of you. And I think I hear what you say, and it sounds like the people who are in your arena, law enforcement or a family, really understand a lot of what you're sharing more than I do. But I can say too, I think because of how expressive you are, it really, I mean, I've met your family, and they were wonderful. And so I think, again, you know, it's really, you're really empowering people by sharing your story. I'd also like to say, though, even though you feel like maybe there's some things that you would have maybe done differently, you know, really including your family in decisions, I think the dialogue that you have had, you can see the connection there. So I just want to add that the empowering of sharing stories or being vulnerable in your thoughts, and that is connecting. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you. And please don't diminish your role, because you are also a family member of a serviceman, and as the mother, right? And feeling that selflessness or what's the word I'm looking for? Helplessness, and not having any control over any of that stuff. So Mike, I'll get back to you in just 1 second, but a question I want to throw out there. Welcome, Terry. It's great to see you. There's that smile. There it is. We're talking about selfless service in the first responder world, and the military, and what the cost is to the family. So that's really kind of where I'm going to go with this, is I want to ask you guys the general question to get your take on it. Take away the excess, the over-the-top stuff in the profession and all the extra work. Catherine, it sounds like your father was on it. He didn't do all that stuff. He had that home work-life balance. I wish more of us did. And if I could get people to start that early in their career rather than towards the latter part of their career like me, sooner's better, figuring out that home work-life balance. But let's say it's even in that more of a perfect world, or where there's the balance. What was the cost to you of being a family member that's in the service, or a first responder? What was the time, maybe physical, emotional, mental cost to you from your perspective, being the family member of a service person, of whatever that means, without any input? Catherine, we can start with you, if you don't mind, if you have an answer.
I do, I think. And it's kind of a cheesy answer, but there wasn't. I didn't have anything negative. I have a few memories from when I was little. I even actually mentioned it to my mom the other day. Remember when Dad wasn't home for a really long time for dinner? And my mom was like, she calls me Kate. She was like, Kate, that was like 6 months when he was in the middle of a transition for a promotion. And for me, it was like, it made a huge impact because Dad wasn't home for dinner, and he's always home for dinner. And so, I mean, I think that's a good example of how I didn't experience negative impacts. And I even remember growing up, there were, obviously I have a lot of police officers in my family, and 2 of them would miss holidays fairly frequently. And I never understood why, because my dad never missed a holiday. And I was like, I don't understand how they have the same job, but they're missing holidays and Dad never misses holidays. So I really, it might not be the best answer, but I really don't have any recollections of negative impact. I think, you know, one thing that I will say is we weren't very emotional in my house. I think my dad is and was very stoic, and I am also present day. And we grew up in a fairly stoic household, which isn't a terrible thing. It hasn't affected me negatively, but I do think that normalizing emotions and talking about emotions and having conversations like the one you had with your son are important. We never had conversations like that. And I think it would have been nice to have had conversations, open conversations about what Dad did and things like that. So I guess that's one way.
Well, thank you for saying that, because I think that actually lays out my plea very well. So if you can have that home work-life balance, you might be like Catherine and have very limited impact to your life, you know. And if you don't know any different, then that's freaking fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. Michael.
Yeah, so two things before I answer the question.
Yes.
Off of what you said in response to me, about being a cog in the machine, is I feel like most of us when we're in service, we forget that, right? Um, we're a vital part of the mission, but it does go on without you. But hopefully, at the end of the day, you still have your family. So, which one's more important, the machine that's going to go on without you, or your family? And so, I think that's important to keep in retrospect. And then also, it was either you or Sarah said something, about I forget. But the point I was going to make on that was, like you've had that realization now. Better late than never. And I always say, man, it's never too late to start. Like, yeah, you've not been that way in the past. Well, start changing it, right? Just start implementing that change. Start being more present. You know, and it's never too late until it's too late. So if you don't like your work family balance, start working on that. And then to answer your question, how it impacted me, being the child of a service member, it was hard, man. Like secondhand trauma is a real thing. You get it from my mom and seeing how she handled things while my dad was gone, and the weight and stress that it put on her, the stress that it put on my dad, and him not always being present even when he was present. So you carry that weight, and I think it has a greater impact when you're a child because you're not mentally mature, so you don't understand things the way an adult would. So I feel you take a lot of it kind of personally, and there's a lot of uncertainty in it. I still to this day remember the conversation that me and my parents had on 9/11 when my dad explained to me that, hey, things are going to be different and I might not be here. And I didn't understand it then, and now looking forward, I'm like, oh yeah, like I'm very fortunate. But then still, like every time dad's gone, you're like, where is he? When's he coming back? Mom's left to carry all the weight while he's gone, and you're, as the oldest child and the son, you kind of have to step up and do what you can. And so yeah, there was a lot of weight in it. Obviously learned a lot from it, but yeah, I would say could have been better.
And I'll say this, and thanks for bringing that part up. It's never too late to start. 20 years to figure it out, kind of, or at least figure it out enough to start working on it. But one thing that I recognize is your family is very forgiving. And I think that there's a huge power to the acknowledgement of it. My son forgives me, and and he told me, he's like, I believe you and I see you work and I've seen you change. And I said, I couldn't have done it for you. I didn't do it for you, but for your younger sisters, now I can be more present. And he says, Dad, that's all I could ask. He's such a good kid, man. And the other part today, that being a family member, especially kids of law enforcement today, it's not a cool thing. Like even my kid in college, he's like, Dad, I'm so proud of what you do, but I don't want you to be ashamed of me because I don't really tell anybody. I said, son, I wouldn't expect you to tell anybody. Because man, and again, just that weight, not being able to say something that you're proud of. Like, hey, I'm proud of my dad, or I'm proud of my mom, but I can't even say that stuff at college. I tell my kids, oh, people ask what your dad does, tell them he's in waste management. You're not really lying. You're dealing with waste, with the problems of society, which is garbage, right? And then you're helping people. So it's when you can't even be honest, that's a tough thing, because not just the social aspect of that, but there could be a real safety component to that. Catherine, you have your hand raised?
Yeah, it's just interesting that you brought that up to me because I was just telling Sarah, I was interviewed on a podcast yesterday and we talked about how in today's world it's so different than when I grew up in the 90s because everyone knew what my dad did. My dad was the little neighborhood hero and all of the kids knew like if you're in danger or something's going on, go to the Boyle's house, find Mr. Boyle. Like everyone knew what he did. He was the go-to person and now it's so different. And we were literally talking about how in today's world, kids and the spouses of police officers make up jobs when they're asked that question. They have like a fake job or a very generic job. I think a big one is like he works for the city. It's just always so generic. And that just like breaks my heart. I can't believe that that's even a thing in today's society. And I'm so sad for police officer children, being one. I'm so sad for them in today's world because I had so much pride and not that they don't, but I would hate to not be able to express that.
Yeah, it's almost like a sense of betrayal in some ways. Because again, I've never worked. The only people that's ever sacrificed for my career is my family, not me. I've never sacrificed a damn thing. Like I said, I wake up eager and happy and smiling to go to work every single day. But I know that's not the case for almost anybody's family that works in that world, whether you're a firefighter, a doctor, a nurse, you're going, they don't, that they're not happy that you're going. So they're the ones that pay. Terry, what is, in your experience, what has been the cost to your family being the first woman sergeant of your department?
I wasn't a sergeant. I was the first female officer.
First female officer. I'm sorry. I apologize.
That's okay. First female officer in the history of my hometown.
It's crazy and awesome.
It was actually extremely difficult because I was paving the way. And I was up against so many barriers in the good old boys club. I mean, I lived through a 10-year lawsuit for sexual harassment, discrimination, being denied pay raises, like that same chief that I ended up suing and winning against told me he was going to get rid of me. So for my family, I can only imagine what my mom and dad were going through when they saw me dealing with that. I mean, I remember one time that I was out. I was in such a bad depression. This is when I was still living at home. I was in such a bad depression. I had gone out. I don't know what type of leave. I don't know if it was like whatever. I remember for 3 days, I literally wasn't eating, sleeping. I didn't shower. The only thing I did for 3 days, every time I woke up in the morning, was put a puzzle together. I worked on that puzzle for 3 days straight. And I was so focused on doing that puzzle. Now, mind you, my mom and dad were watching me live through this. Being focused on that puzzle is one of the things that pulled me out of that at that time. And then, of course, they saw me going through all the stressors and, I mean, even the injuries because my body was absorbing all that. And then, finally, when that came to a head and I mean, they witnessed a lot. And then even when I finally chose to retire under that chief who is actually no longer the chief of my agency, thank God. After I retired, my mom literally said, I mean, she was like, you're not going to fight this? No, you fought everything else through your whole career and you're not going to fight this. No, Mom, I'm not. And I literally told her, I'm like, Mom, you don't understand. If I turn around and fight this, I know I'll win. I have the truth. But if I go back and they trigger me into this, they're going to literally have my brain matter on the girls' locker room. That's where I'm going with this. And I told my mom that. So after I did retire and everything, a couple months later, when I kind of started to come down a little bit, she told me, she said, I'm so glad you are no longer a police officer. I was getting to the point that I didn't even want to be around you anymore. And I didn't see that in myself. So yeah, I mean, it took a toll. And then not being around for holidays, I intentionally worked. I knew I was getting double time and a half. And I knew I didn't have to deal with all the drama. Why wouldn't I want to work? I could go to work and it was a quiet day and I was making twice as much money. Hello.
Yeah.
So, and then as far as Tony and I, it almost ended our marriage. It did. It definitely took a toll. And, you know, I mean, looking back, I loved being a cop, absolutely loved what I did. Knowing what I know now, I honestly wish I had left the agency I started with after about 3 years, got the experience and moved on, where I could have had a healthier environment to work in.
And I
So,
think it's almost more difficult for women in this line of work because, I generalize this, the men are generally the protectors and they're the dudes, if you will. But there's a social cost to that perceptually for some, when maybe you're not the breadwinner and maybe you're not seen as the head of the household based purely on your profession. And so there's some, you know, some solvency that needs to be done there for some folks, because, you know, I think oftentimes we don't know who we are. Sarah, we've talked about this a lot, where we get so wrapped and entangled in our careers that we think that our careers are who we are.
and I want to preface that by saying, I mean, for 30 plus years, wearing that uniform, not understanding that we make the badge, that badge doesn't make us. On top of that, I don't have any children. So I identified with being a police officer, right? And especially in our society today, when we meet people, what is one of the first questions we ask? So what do you do
What do
for
you do? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. People ask us that, and I immediately look to like, if somebody asks my wife what I do, she kind of looks at me and is waiting for should I really tell them, or do we go with the fake job? You know, and it's a weird dynamic to have to go through, for sure.
Yeah.
But, you know, when you wrap your whole lives in that, then at some point when it's done and you retire, like Catherine said, hopefully it's a retirement after a full career. But if that's all you've ever been, then what are you once you retire? And then again, more cost to your family, because you're going to have to go through that discovery process, that identity crisis. And it's them that's going to have to put up with your bullshit of figuring that out, because I guarantee you it's not going to be some easy process. So Sarah, we'll wrap. Oh, go ahead.
Knowing firsthand, it is not.
Yeah, it's a rough ride. And people, even after a good, positive career, without a lot of trauma, when they leave, that's usually where their struggles come from, because they don't know what to do. They don't know who they are. What, you know, are you a mother? Are you a father? Are you a, you know, husband, a wife? Those are the things that I really am, who happens to be a police officer. And we have to really embrace that part. But again, there is a place for getting that full buy-in. But at some point, once you're all bought in, we need to start teaching our people to, number one, give more time at home, not be all so mission focused, but also starting to figure out young, after 3 to 5 years, of who you are outside of these jobs. Who are you outside of being a service member? Who are you outside of being a first responder? Wrap yourself in the fact that if you're not married, but you're an uncle and an auntie or whatever, something that's outside of here. And Sarah, and yeah, you know, we can pick this conversation up again in the future. We're kind of running out of time here, and I want to be respectful of everybody's time. But, you know, watching Scott Mann's play, Last Out, LG Green Beret, that was one of the biggest things that I took out of that. And it's at the very end of the play, and I don't want to give it away because I want you to watch it. But the struggles that he had there at the end had to do with that work-home life balance. Now, understand, being a service member, you don't always have that choice while you stay in that arena, but you always have the ultimate choice to walk away and separate from whatever that bubble is. Even in the military, you can walk away from a certain assignment and do something else. But it's a very hard thing, especially when you're in an elite community, because there's so much pride. You put so much work into that. But then it goes back to what I said earlier, the greatest gift that we can give the world is to raise a good family and to create good people to put in it. So that's a really weird balance that each one of us is going to have to figure out for ourselves and what works for our families. And as we kind of close this out, I want to implore you, everybody that's going to watch this, to remember your families. Remember not to get stuck in this. Oftentimes it can be an egocentric cycle of thank you for your service, thank you for all that you do. Remember that we're very selfish in that arena. Most of us, we're choosing to do this. Our families very often are not, and push that praise to them. So anybody that ever thanks me for my service, I said, or my sacrifice, I've never sacrificed a thing. I'll pass it on to my family. They're the ones that do all the sacrificing, not me. So please, early in your career, start thinking about your family. And even if you're young and you're not married, you don't have kids, let that basis of that, let that start. Be with your mom and your dad and your sisters and your brothers. Make that family focus up front. You don't have to give them 50% necessarily, but try to make it somewhere between 30 and 40 at least. Start working your way, because the more you move on in your career, it's easy to let your career consume you and those things go down. That time with the family, try to let it be the other way. Be all in at front, and then start, as you move on, start to give more to your family. It's a healthy way to live. It will prolong your relationships. It will make you a better husband, a mother. It will make you a better father, a mother, and a husband and a wife. Being present for them. Choose to be present for them. Be self-aware in that, and make the deliberate, difficult decision, because it isn't easy to give that focus one way or the other, make that evaluation, to push that button and to give whatever's lacking more focus. Try to be more even-keeled. Thank you for participating in this. Thank you for your input. Before we wrap up, does anybody have any last words of advice for anybody who's going to watch us going forward?
I love what Catherine said in the comments. She said it will make you a better cop.
It does. A better service member, for sure. Because when you're whole, you have more to give. And, we often talk about your gas tank being empty and having to take a break. We'll also remember you have you're like a vehicle with two gas tanks. You got your family gas tank and you got your work gas tank. Find out which one's full. And sometimes you got to rob Peter to pay Paul and make that thing full. Catherine.
I just wanted to share one last thing, because you touched on it towards the end, and I think that it's a little hack that my dad did by accident, but he became a cop when he was 30. So when he became a cop, he had a very strong sense of identity. He knew what his priorities were, his values. He knew who he was and what he wanted to get out of his life. And so going into policing, it was easy for him to compartmentalize, for him to see this, I'm cop Mike now, and when I'm home, I'm Mike. So I think that that's something, just like I said, you touched on it at the end, and just having that really strong sense of identity is going to serve you through your career and then after you retire, because then there's no confusion once you retire either.
Absolutely. Knowing who you are and figuring that out early. I think that's invaluable advice. Well, thank you everybody for giving your time here. Please reach out. If you have any questions or you want to engage more in this, look up The Power of Our Story, connect with myself, Michael Parker, Catherine Boyle, Terry Peters, Sarah Carell, The Power of Our Story. Reach out. We're here. There's a lot of resources to help you navigate these things. If you want to continue the conversation offline, all of us are open almost all the time. So please reach out. And Michael, I guess we'll kick this back to you to close this thing out, baby.
Well, you stole the words that I was going to use, but if you guys haven't connected, if you're watching this, you're looking for, community, and that's more a family than a community. That's what we are here at The Power of Your Story. We're a family. We got each other, and feel free to reach out to Sarah. Get plugged in. There's several times, different events. Tune in, become part of our family, and let's grow each other. But until next time, guys, this has been another edition of The Power of Your Story. Power of our story. Power of our story. Look, I've been here so long. It was the power of your story. Now it's the power of our story. But we'll see you guys next week.
Love you guys. Thank you.